Well, good evening, my friends. What a absolutely fantastic weekend. I guess a little rainy yesterday, but not too bad. And oddly enough, the boys and I went on a huge hike today. We put in quite a few miles, and it was a pretty strenuous hike. Quite a. Oh, excuse me. Oh, let me get my yawn out of the way there. Pretty strenuous hike, lots of ups and downs. More ups, I guess, than downs. But it was good. I think we were at about, I can't remember the mileage, a little over 6 miles. Um, but anyway, got back, chilled a little bit, just kind of got some stuff done around the house, but just an outstanding weekend. I think this week it's going to get a little chilly, or not chilly. Oh, excuse me, a little chillier than it's been, I guess. Going to go back down into the 50s, but I'll take it. I don't remember the last time I turned the heat on. I think it was earlier in the week, so I'm all for that, my friends. So when we read Friday night, um, Jurgis was a hobo, a tramp. He was a tramp, right? He was traveling around the Midwest, I guess we could say. Stella's running around chasing a hairball or something. And yeah, I think he was kind of getting his aggression out a little bit, de-stressing. And one night he went into a establishment, I guess we could say, and ended up losing all of his money. So he had met that family, right? He had met another Lithuanian family when we last left him, and now we pick up from there. So we're doing pretty good. I did not. I told you I was thinking about doing a kind of a jump ahead episode, and I think we're going to be okay. I think we're going to finish by next Sunday. So I think that we should be able to start the next book. Maybe it'll be next Monday that we start the next book, but that's okay. I think we got about 6 good nights of reading left. So let's get back into it. Chapter 23. Oh, Mr. Maz gave me this shirt. I don't know if you can see it. It's a dumpster labeled 2020, and it's on fire. He gave that to me. We did a little parade for Miss Vonstantina, a little birthday parade. We just drove by her house and waved a little happy birthday to her and had signs. And Mr. Maz got that for me, so wanted to show it off. All right, chapter 23. Here we go. Early in the fall, Jurgis set out for Chicago again. All the joy went out of tramping as soon as a man could not keep warm in the hay. And like many thousands of others, he deluded himself with the hope that by coming early he could avoid the rush. He brought $15 with him, hidden away in one of his shoes, a sum which had been saved from the saloon keepers, not so much by his conscience, but by the fear which filled him at the thought of being out of work in the city in the winter time. He traveled upon the railroad with several other men, hiding in freight cars at night, liable to be thrown off at any time, regardless of the speed of the train. When he reached the city, he left the rest, for he had money and they did not, and he meant to save himself in this fight. He would bring to it all the skill and practice had brought him. He would stand whoever fell. On fair nights, he would sleep in the park or a truck or an empty barrel or box, and when it was rainy or cold, he would stow himself away upon a shelf of a tenant house or pay 3 cents for the privileges of a squatter in a tenement hallway. He would eat free lunches at free lunches, 5 cents a meal, and never a cent more. So he might keep alive for 2 months or more, and in the time he could surely find a job. He would have to bid farewell to his summer cleanliness, of course, for he would come out of this with the first night's lodging with his clothes alive with vermin. There was no place in the city where he could wash even his face, unless he went down to the lakefront, and there it would soon be ice. First, he went to the steel mill and the harvester works, and he found that the places there had been filled long ago. He was careful to keep away from the stockyards. He was a single man now, he told himself, and he meant to stay one, to have his wages for his own when he got his job. He began the long, weary round of factories and warehouses, tramping all day, from one end of the city to the other, finding everywhere from 10 to 100 men ahead of him. He watched the newspapers, too, but no longer was he to be taken by the smooth-spoken agents. He had been told all of these tricks while on the road. In the end, it was through the newspaper that he got a job after nearly a month of seeking. It was a call for 100 laborers, and though he thought it was a fake, he went because the place was nearby. He found a line of men a block long, but as a wagon chanced to come out of the alley and break the line, he saw his chance to spring and seize a place. The men threatened him and tried to throw him out, and he cursed and made a disturbance to attract the policemen, upon which they subsided, knowing that if the latter interfered, it would be to fire them all. An hour or two later, he entered a room and confronted a big Irishman behind a desk. Ever work in Chicago before? The man inquired, and whether it was a good angel that had put Jurgis's mind, or an institution of his shirt and whips. He moved to the answer, "No, sir." "Where do you come from?" "Kansas City." "Any references?" "No, sir. I'm just an unskilled man. I've got 2 good arms. I want men for hard work. It's all underground digging tunnels for telephones. Maybe it won't suit you." "I'm willing, sir. Anything for me. What's the pay?" 15 cents an hour. "I'm willing, sir." "All right, go back there and give your name." So with half an hour, he was at work, far underneath the streets of the city. The tunnel was a peculiar one for telephone wires. It was about 8 feet high and with a level floor nearly as wide. It had innumerable branches and perfect spider webs beneath the city. Jurgis walked over a half a mile with his gang to the place where they were to work. Stranger yet, the tunnel was lighted by electricity, and upon it was laid a double-tracked narrow-gauge railroad. But Jurgis was not there to ask questions, and he did not give the matter a thought. It was nearly a year afterward that he finally learned the meaning of this whole affair. The city council had passed a quiet and innocent little bill allowing a company to construct telephone conduits under the city streets, and upon the strength of this, a great corporation had proceeded to tunnel all Chicago with a system of railway freight subways. In the city, there was a combination of employers representing hundreds of millions of capital, and formed for the purpose of crushing the labor unions. The chief union, which trouble it is, the Teamsters, and when these freight tunnels were completed, connecting all the big factories and stores with the railroad depots, they would have the Teamsters union by the throat. Now and then there were rumors and murmurs of the Board of Aldermen, and once there was a committee to investigate. But each time another small fortune was paid over, and the rumors died away, until at last the city woke up with the start to find the work completed. There was a tremendous scandal, of course. It was found that the city records had been falsified and other crimes committed, and some of Chicago's big capitalists got into jail, figuratively speaking. The aldermen declared that they had no idea of it all. In fact, in spite of the fact that the main entrance of the work had been the rear of the saloon that one of them had owned. It was in a newly opened cut that Jurgis worked, and so he knew he had an all-winter job. He was so rejoiced that he treated himself to a spree that night, and with the balance of his money, he hired himself a place in a tenement room, where he slept upon a big homemade straw mattress with 4 other working men. This was $1 a week, And for four more, he got his food in a boarding house near his work. This would leave him $4 extra each week, an unthinkable sum of money. At the onset, he had to pay for his digging tools and also buy a pair of heavy boots, since his shoes were falling to pieces, and a flannel shirt, since the one he had worn all summer was in shreds. He spent a week meditating whether or not he should think also to buy an overcoat. There was one belonging to a Hebrew collar button peddler who had died in the room next to him, in which the landlady was holding for her rent. In the end, however, Jurgis decided to do without it, as he was to be underground by day and in bed at night. This was an unfortunate decision, however, for it drove him more quickly than ever into the saloons. From now on, Jurgis worked from 7 o'clock until 5:30, with a half. Ooh, the wind's picking up outside. With a half hour for dinner, which meant that he never saw the sunlight on weekdays. In the evenings, there was no place for him to go except a ballroom. No place where there was light or warmth, where he could hear a little music or sit with a companion and talk. He had now no home to go to. He had no affection left in his life. And the pitiful mockery of it in the camaraderie of vice. On Sundays, the churches were open, but where there was a church in which an ill-smelling workman with vermin crawling upon his neck could sit without seeing people on edge away and look annoyed. He had, of course, his corner. He had, of course, his corner in a close, unheated room, with a window opening upon a blank wall 2 feet away. And also he had the bare streets, with the winter gales sweeping through them. Besides this, he had only the saloons, and of course, he had to drink to stay in them. If he drank now and then, he was free to make himself at home, to gamble with dice or a pack of greasy cards, to play at a dingy pool table for money, or to look at a beer-stained pink sporting paper with pictures of murderers and half-naked women. It was for such pleasure as these that he spent his money, and such was his life during the 6 weeks and a half that he toiled for the merchants of Chicago, to enable them to break the grip of their Teamsters Union. In a work thus carried out, not much thought had been given to the welfare of the laborers. On an average, the tunneling cost a life a day and several manglings. It was seldom, however, that more than a dozen or two men heard of any one accident. The work was all done by new boring machinery, with as little blasting as possible. But there would be falling rocks and crushing supports and premature explosions, and in addition, all the dangers of railroading. So it was that one night, as Jurgis was on his way out with his gang, an engine and a loading car dashed around one of the innumerable right-angle branches and struck him upon the shoulder, hurling him against the concrete wall and knocking him senseless. When he opened his eyes again, it was to the clanging of the bell of an ambulance. He was lying in it, covered by a blanket, and it was threading its way slowly through the holiday shopping crowds. They took him to the county hospital, where a young surgeon set his arm. Then he was washed and laid upon a bed in a ward with a score or two more of maimed and mangled men. Jurgis spent his Christmas in this hospital, and it was the pleasantest Christmas he had had in America. Every year there were scandals and investigations in this institution. The newspaper charging that doctors were allowed to try fantastic experiments upon the patients, but Jurgis knew none of this. His only complaint was that they used to feed him upon tinned meat, which no man who had ever worked in Packingtown would feed his dog. Jurgis had often wondered who ate this canned corned beef and roast beef of the stockyards. Now he began to understand that it was what you might call graft meat, put up to be sold to public officials and contractors, and to be eaten by soldiers and sailors, prisoners and inmates of institutions, shantymen and gangs of railroad laborers. Jurgis was ready to leave the hospital at the end of the 2 weeks. This did not mean that his arm was strong and that he was able to go back to work, but simply that he could get along without further attention. and that his place was needed for someone worse off than he. That he was utterly helpless and had no means of keeping himself alive in the meantime was something which did not concern the hospital authorities nor anyone else in the city. As it chanced, he had been hurt on a Monday and had just paid for the last week's board and his room rent, and spent nearly all the balance of his Saturday's pay. He had less than 75 cents in his pockets and $1.50 due to him for the day's work he had done before he was hurt. He might possibly have sued the company and got some damage for his injuries, but he did not know this, and it was not the company's business to tell him. He went and got his pay and his tools, which he left in a pawn shop for 50 cents. Then he went to his landlady, who had rented his place and had no other for him, and then to his boarding house keeper, who looked him over and questioned him, as he must certainly be helpless for a couple of months, and had boarded there only 6 weeks. She decided very quickly that it would not be worth it to risk him on trust. So Jurgis went out into the streets in a most dreadful plight. It was bitterly cold, and heavy snow was falling, beating him in the face. He had no overcoat, no place to go, and $2.65 in his pocket, with the certainty that he could not earn another cent for months. The snow meant no chance for him now. He must walk along and see others shoveling, vigorously and active, and he with his left arm bound to his side. He could not hope to tide himself over for odd jobs or with loading trucks. He could not even sell newspapers or carry satchels, because he was now at the mercy of any rival. Words cannot paint the terror that came over him as he realized this. He was like a wounded animal in the forest. He was forced to compete with his enemies upon unequal terms. There would be no consideration for him because of his weakness. It was no one's business to help him in such distress, to make the fight at least a bit easier for him. Even if he took to begging, he would be at a disadvantage, for reasons which he was to discover in good time. In the beginning, he could not think of anything except getting out of the awful cold. He went into one of the saloons he had been wont to frequent and bought a drink, then stood by the fire, shivering and waiting to be ordered out. According to an unwritten law, the buying of a drink included the privilege of loafing for just so long. Then one had to buy another drink or move on. And Jurgis was an old customer, entitled him to somewhat of a longer stop, but then he had been away for 2 weeks and was evidently on the bum. He might plead and tell his hard luck story, but that would not help him much. A saloon keeper was to be moved by such means would have soon his place jammed to the doors with hobos on a day like this. So Jurgis went out into another place and paid another nickel. He was so hungry this time that he could not resist the hot beef stew, an indulgence which cut short his stay by a considerable time. When he was again told to move on, he made his way to a tough place in the Levee district, where now and then he was told with a certain rat-eyed bohemian working man of his acquaintance seeking a woman. It was Jurgis's vain hope that here the proprietor would let him remain as a sitter in low-class places. In the dead of winter, saloon keepers would often allow one or two forlorn-looking bums who came in covered with snow or soaked with rain to sit by a fire and look miserable to attract custom. A working man would come in, feeling cheerful after a day's work was over, and it would trouble him to have to take his class with such a sight under his nose. And so he would call out, "Hey, bub, what's the matter? You look as if you'd been up against it." And then the other would begin to pour out some tale of misery, and the man would say, "Come have a glass, and that'll make you brace up." And so they would drink together, and if the tramp was sufficiently wretched looking or good enough at the gab, they might have two. And if they were to discover that they were from the same country or had lived in the same city or worked at the same trade, they might sit down at a table and spend an hour or two and talk. And before they got through, the saloon keeper would have taken in $1. All of this might seem diabolical, but the saloon keeper was in no wise to blame for it. He was in the same plight as the manufacturer who has to adulterate and misrepresent his product. If he does not, someone else will. and the saloon keeper, unless he is also an alderman, is apt to be in debt to the big brewers and on the verge of being sold out. The market for sitters was glutted that afternoon, however, and there was no place for Jurgis. In all, he had spent 6 nickels in keeping a shelter over him that frightful day. Then it was just dark, and the station houses would not be open until midnight. At the last place, however, there was a bartender who knew him and liked him and let him doze in one of the tables until the boss came back. And also, he was going out. The man gave him a tip. On the next block, there was a religious revival of some sort, with preaching and singing, and hundreds of hobos would go there for shelter and for warmth. Jurgis went straight away and saw a sign hung out, saying that the door would be open at 7:30. Then he walked or half ran a block and hid a while in a doorway, then ran again, and so on until the hour. At the end of it, he was all but frozen, and fought his way in with the rest of the throng, at the risk of having his arm broken again, to get closer to the big stove. By 8 o'clock, the place was so crowded that the speakers ought to have been flattened. The aisles were filled halfway up, and the doormen were packed tight enough to walk upon. There were 3 elderly gentlemen in black upon the platform, and a young lady who played the piano in front. First, they sang a hymn, and then all 3, a tall, smooth-shaven man. And then one of the 3, a tall, smooth-shaven man, very thin and wearing black spectacles, began an address. Jurgis heard smatterings of it, for the reason that terror kept him awake. He knew that he snored abominably, and to have been put out just then would be like a death sentence to him. The evangelist was preaching sin and redemption, the infinite grace of God, and his pardon for human frailty. He was very much in earnest, and he meant well. But Jurgis, as he listened, found his soul filled with hatred. What did he know about sin and suffering? With his smooth black coat and his neatly starched collar, his body warm, his belly full, the money in his pocket, and lecturing men who were struggling for their lives, men at the death grapple with the demon powers of hunger and cold. This, of course, was unfair, but Jurgis felt that these men were out of touch with the life they discussed. They were unfitted to solve its problems, nay, they themselves were part of the problem. They were the part of the order established that was crushing men down and beating them. They were of the triumphant and insolent possessors. They had a hall and a fire and food and clothing and money, and so they might preach to hungry men, and the hungry men must be humble and listen. They were trying to save their souls, and who but a fool could fail to see that was what was the matter with their souls, was what they had not been able to get a decent existence for their bodies. At 11, the meeting closed, and the desolate audience filed out into the snow, muttering curses upon the new traders who had got repentance and gone up to the platform. It was yet an hour before the station house would open, and Jurgis had no overcoat, and he was weak from a long illness. During the hour, he nearly perished. He was obliged to run hard to keep his blood moving at all. Then he came back to the station house and found a crowd blocking the street before the door. This was in the month of January 1904, when the country was on the verge of hard times, and the newspapers were reporting the shutting down of factories every day. It was estimated that 1.5 million men were thrown out of work before the spring. So all the hiding places of the city were crowded. Before the station house door, men fought and tore each other like savage beasts. When at last the place was jammed and they shut the doors, half the crowd was still outside, and Jurgis, with his helpless arm, was among them. There was no choice then but to go to a lodging house and spend another dime. It really broke his heart to do this at 12:30, after he had wasted the night at the meeting and on the street. He would be turned out of the lodging house promptly at 7. They had had shelves which served as bunks and contrived that they could be dropped, and any man who was slow about obeying orders would be tumbled out onto the floor. This was one day. and the coal spell lasted for 14 of them. At the end of 6 days, every cent of Jurgis's money was gone. Then he went out to the streets to beg for his life. He would begin as soon as the business of the city was moving. He would sally forth from a saloon, and after making sure there was no policeman in sight, would approach every likely person who had passed, telling him his woeful story and pleading for a nickel or a dime. Then, when he got one, he would dart around the corner and return to his base to get warm. And his victim, seeing him do this, would go away, vowing that he would never give a cent to a beggar again. The victim never paused to ask where else Jurgis could have gone under the circumstances, where he, the victim, might have gone. At the saloon, Jurgis could not get, could not only get more food and better food than he could get in any restaurant for the same money, but a drink in the bargain to warm him up. Also, he could find a comfortable seat by a fire and could chat with a companion until he was warm as toast. At the saloon, too, he felt at home. Part of the saloon keeper's business was to offer a home and refreshments to beggars in exchange for the proceeds of their foraging. And was there anyone else in the whole city who could do this? Would the victim have done it to himself? Poor Jurgis might have been expected to make such a successful beggar. He was just out of the hospital and desperately sick looking, and with a helpless arm. Also, he had no overcoat, and shivered pitifully. But alas, it was again the case of the honest merchant, who finds that the guidance of unadulterated article is driven to the wall by the artistic counterfeit. Jurgis as a beggar was simply a blundering amateur in competition with organized and scientific professionalism. He was just out of the hospital, but the story was worn and threadbare, and how could he prove it? He had his arm in a sling, and it was the device of a regular beggar's little boy could have scorned. He was pale and shivering, but there were made up with cosmetics, and they had studied the art of chattering their teeth. As to his being without an overcoat, among them you would meet a man who would never swear that he had nothing but a ragged linen duster and a pair of cotton trousers. So cleverly had they concealed the several suits of all wool underwear beneath. Many of these professional mendicants had comfortable homes and families and thousands of dollars in the bank. Some of them have retired upon their earnings and gone into the business of fitting out and doctoring others, or working children at the trade. There was someone who had both their arms bound tightly to their sides and padded stumps in their sleeves. Uh-oh. There have been quite a few fire trucks and ambulances going by. There were some who had no legs and pushed themselves upon a wheeled platform, some who had been favored with blindness and were led by pretty little dogs, some less fortunate and mutilated themselves or burned themselves, or had brought horrible sores upon themselves with chemicals. You might suddenly encounter upon the street a man holding out to you a finger rotting and discolored with gangrene, or one with livid scarlet wounds half escaped from their filthy bandages. These desperate ones were the dregs of the city cesspools, wretches who hid at night in the rain-soaked cellars of old ramshackle tenements, in stale beer dives and opium joints, with abandoned women in the last stages of the harlot's progress, women who had been kept by Chinamen and turned away at last to die. Every day the police net would drag hundreds of them off the streets, and in the detention hospital you might see them herded together in a miniature inferno, with hideous, beastly faces, bloated and leprous with disease, laughing, shouting, screaming in all stages of drunkenness, barking like dogs, gibbering like apes, raving and tearing themselves in delirium. Bam! Another chapter. Perfect at 9:30. All right. Let's lock it down there. We are cruising along, my friends. We are cruising along. And like I said, I think it's going to be close. I think by next Sunday we'll be done with this, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of sunshine. during the week with our book. You know, our temperatures here are, it's not anything but my diet beverage here. You know, it's that time of the year. It's getting nicer outside. So let's hope that along with the nicer weather comes some nicer times for our buddy Jurgis. So we haven't seen each other for 2 days. And I guess I'm not really sure that a ton of stuff, awesome stuff is really happened in the news. But, you know, I do think that there is some good stuff. And we've got some good stuff for this day in history. So where are we now, my friends? It looks like in New York State, we're still floating right around 300 deaths per day. Actually, 280, so a little under 300 deaths. And again, the governor today said that, you know, this is unacceptable, right? This is unacceptable. It needs to be 0 deaths from at least COVID. So, you know, when is that actual day going to hit? It looks like it's going to be a while. I don't think it's going to be, you know, it's not going to be in a month. It's not going to be in 2. I think that this is going to be a while. And one of the things that I saw the governor talk about today, well, it was either yesterday or today, because I caught up on both of his newscasts today. In one of them, there's a lot of talk about a second wave of COVID or a second peak. Is that coming now? Is that coming in the fall? Is that coming this time next year? They really don't know. And, you know, they were talking a lot about like the influenza that hit the world right at the end of World War I. Excuse me. That really didn't go away for about 2 years. Peaked, came up, peaked, came up, you know. So I don't know that we're going to go through 2 years of fighting this, but it seems likely that this is not going to go away for a while. Oh, look at this. You can actually see I got a little bit of, you can see the sun from my hike today, and probably can't see it on my arms now. But I got a little bit of sunburn on my arms too. Anyways, I'm sorry. Is there going to be a second wave? Question mark. So right now they did another, I guess, study, 15,000 New Yorkers, and what they know in this other study, and it seems to be a little bit higher, like 2% higher in men than women, but it seems as though, or it looks as though, about 12.5% of New Yorkers have the antibodies in their body. They got it. They got COVID. They were exposed to it, and they fought it. Tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m., I have I'm a little worried here because there are even more police sirens and fire trucks outside. Huh. Wow, there's a lot of them. Sorry. So anyway, so I'm going to the doctor tomorrow, and I'm going to ask him. I'm going to say, hey, doc, let's do it. Test me. I don't know if he can or not, but I want to be tested. And since I am a type 2 diabetic and I am in a risk pool, I'm thinking they might. My dad is elderly, and no, I am not elderly. My dad is elderly and he's a type 2 diabetic. And he and I, because my dad's blind, you guys know this, I've told you it. He and I go to our physicals. We have the same doctor, so we always go together. We have our appointments back to back. So I'm hoping that they're going to at least test him and hopefully test me. So one of the things that I saw today, I think it was actually signed on Friday, is the governor is created an executive order and created this program called Nourish New York. So right now we have a lot of companies, or I'm sorry, restaurants that aren't doing the full business that they've been used to doing. And because of that, farmers that have been growing stuff, and right now, like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I work on a farm, and farms in New York are not like, whoa, we're overloaded with stuff, right? Some farms, like our farm, we grow things in these things called high tunnels. So they're, I don't know, maybe 25 feet wide. They're like 120 feet long. And we grow greens and arugula and kale and like rabbit food kind of stuff for most people. But, there is stuff that we're selling. It's not a ton of stuff. We also have greenhouses where we grow all of our potted plants and, all that kind of stuff. So that's really what we're kind of taking off selling right now. So I don't know that farmers right this minute are going to be losing a ton of money, but in the next few weeks, probably by, the end of the month, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that, whether you know it or not, there is a lot of stuff. Lettuces, asparagus, maybe even like by the end of this month, you might start to see early cucumbers and summer squashes and stuff like that. So, hopefully we can start to get, I like the Schenectady Farmers Market. I think I told you guys that opened up. They had another week of it this week, and I think they added some more. Other farmer markets are going to start to open up. So hopefully the farms will have more outlets, but this thing, Nourish New York, short story long, Mr. Martin, is the government is going to put $25 million into getting surplus farm food into the hands of, people now that are finding themselves in need. Not a lot of details on how exactly that's going to happen that I saw today. I'm assuming that they're probably going to start, detailing that more. One of the programs that New York State has is for low-income families, for elderly people, for veterans, is a program called FMNP, the Farmers Market Nutrition Program. So what happens is you are mailed, I think 12 $4 certificates, and you can go to farmers markets and you can use those like money. So if you are, if you're a low income person, if you're an elderly person or a veteran, you can get these. And so New York State already has a program to help people and help New York farmers. So I'm assuming it's probably going to be something like that. But if the farmer markets aren't in full swing yet, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe they're going to let people use something like, like these checks to actually go to the farm and buy things, which would be cool. And you can do that at the farm that I work at. You can go to the farm stand and do that. Okay. What else do we have here? So it seems like the real big scare in New York State, and always remember, guys, chime in here. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please don't be afraid to throw them up there, okay? the nursing homes in New York State is where the real scary stuff is happening right now. I guess out of the 280 people that died in the last 24 hours, 50 of them. So let me do some quick math. What would that be? 18%, somewhere around 15, 16, 17% of them are elderly people in nursing homes like the Teresian House. So the Teresian House in Albany, I guess, has got 50 new cases. So holy cow, right? They got to do something. They got to do something down there, and I don't know what they can do. I mean, I just don't. But that seems like it's the real scary place in New York if you live in a nursing home. I did show this to you guys earlier. Mr. Maz got me this 2020. If it was a garbage can, not a garbage can, one of those big garbage dumpsters. It's on fire. I think I'm going to hang this in my room next year. So anyways, that's the big concern in New York State, or I should say the highest concern in New York State. All right. So the other thing is, and I think I brought this up the other day, Stefanik, she's a congresswoman from the Adirondacks. And I'm sorry, her first name is eluding me right now. She has, again, I guess, come after the governor because the governor has not made a call on summer camps. So, I mean, I think he has. I think the answer is probably no. But I think he's waiting until the last possible minute to say it. And I think what he probably doesn't understand is that it's pretty much here. My sons and I have gone to Boy Scout camp it's got to be 8 or 9 years in a row. Cub Scout and Boy Scout camp. We usually have it all paid for by now, right? It's all, they've picked their merit badges. I have to go as a leader, but they've picked their merit badges. They've picked the stuff that they're doing. They're all locked in. They're ready to go. And we've already paid for camp by this point. So, I think Boy Scout camp, when it comes to it's pretty laid back. Like some other camps, you're booking the camp in January, So, I don't know. I have a feeling it's going to be no bueno for summer camps. I've been thinking about summer movies. Probably no bueno for summer movies. How do you go to a movie theater and be 6 feet away from somebody? Right? The movie, they would make no money, right? They'd have to run the movies like 24/7. They'd have to clean the theaters in between, like really super duper clean the theater. I don't know. I don't know that there were any super awesome movies coming out this summer that I had to go and see, but anywho, is it Andrea Stefanik? Maybe that's her name. All right. So here's the other big thing. I'm going to save actually that big thing for last. So Michigan protests are getting a little cuckoo, my friends. They're all over national news. These protesters are coming out. They've got their guns. They've got their Confederate flags. They've got Nazi flags with swastikas on them, right? And people are like, "What? Wait a minute! Whoa! What?" So you're pulling out a Nazi flag. A flag which was represents a party that discriminated against people, a lot of different people, not just Jews, limited the rights of. I don't think you're carrying the right flag around here, my friends. I don't think you are. And it's interesting because people around the world, it's interesting to me, people around the world are kind of looking at America going, yeah, America, you're kind of crazy right now. Like, you're coming unglued. And I think maybe some people are. I don't think America itself is coming unglued, but I do think that some people are. And these Michigan protests are getting a little, they're getting a little something. So, Texas, we talked about this last week. Elise Stefanik, thank you, Mrs. D. Texas. So, Texas opened back up Monday. However, here's how they opened back up. Or, sorry, Friday. But here's how they opened back up. If you ran a restaurant that could seat, you were zoned for 100 people, you could only let 25 people in. Okay. So you can only kind of operate at 25% capacity. Now, here's the thing. Since Friday, Texas has already seen, they've already seen an uptick in cases. But what the I guess you call them, well, the medical professionals, the scientists that are monitoring this said the spike happened at the end of the week before the regulations were even lifted. So that means that they're expecting that probably by tomorrow or Tuesday, they're going to see even a bigger jump in cases. So Germany saw a big spike in cases after they reopened. Now, one of our states, Texas, has already seen and I, to tell you the truth, guys, I mean, I don't think that's a horrible plan. I don't think that's a real bad plan. Hey, guys, we can reopen. You got to keep your social distancing. You got to keep your masks on, but we got to keep it to 25%, right? So open your business, but you're only allowed 25% of that number. I don't think that's a bad idea. That might be what happens with us. However, there has been an immediate uptick in cases. It was starting before. So here's what I'm thinking is I'm thinking people on Wednesday were like, what the hell? It's going to open on Friday. What are they going to do to us? Right. So Wednesday and Thursday, people started getting all fired up and getting ready to get back into it. You know what I mean? And they were probably breaking the rules a little bit. And that's maybe why they saw that uptick. So I'm hoping tomorrow that when we see numbers out of Texas, it was a fluke. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it's going to be. Okay, what else did we have? So I guess if you look at the country and you look at the amount of people that got sick and the amount of people that died, this past week saw the 24-hour cycle that was the worst since all of this started. So Governor Cuomo said that this is day 64 in New York. But it's certainly not day 64 for the country. But the country as a whole saw its worst 24 hours this week. So what does that mean for the country, right? Are we just hitting the peak for the country right now? Because that means we're looking at July for the country if it's a true bell curve, right? But I don't know, my friends. I don't think we're out of the woods. I think we're going to have to keep this going for a bit. But I think people, at least what I've seen, I think I've seen people be smart. Today, where the boys and I went hiking, we went hiking in the Catskills. We went to a place called North South Lake Campground. And on this campground is a trail called the Escarpment Trail. The trail actually starts, it's part of the long path. It starts in New York City, and it actually goes all the way up through the Catskills, and then it comes back down to Altamont. So we hiked around the lake. We went up the Escarpment Trail, went to the top of the mountain. We came back down. I don't know. We did like 6.5 miles or something like that, right? Lots of people out with masks. Nobody was hanging out close to one another. However, lots of New Jersey cars. Lots of New Jersey cars. So here's exactly what we don't want. Is we don't want to see people crossing state lines. Now, normally, I would say, well, geez, what are you going to do about it? But here's the deal. The boys and I got up early. We got there. We got a parking spot. We started hiking. Maybe there were 15 cars. By the time we left, there must have been 80. The parking lot was totally filled. People were lining up on the road, and there were state DEC officers there checking people and letting them in. So here's the deal. New Jersey, peace. Get out of here. Tow them. I mean, I'm not kidding. Get out of here. We don't want this. This is what is going to keep the spread going. We're not going to hold it against them that they're, New Jerseyans. We won't totally hold that against them. I guess they're a little bit better than massholes, but we don't want people crossing states. Not yet. Not yet. Okay. So other than I have two other bits of news for you. How are we doing on? Oh, we're running a little late on time. That's okay. So the Supreme Court hears cases, and typically when a case makes it to the Supreme Court, you have a certain amount of time. I think each side has 10 minutes to argue, and then the justices can give you more time. I don't remember the base amount of time. But anyways, so tomorrow the Supreme Court is going to go back into session, but they are going to do it virtually. So they are going to hear arguments over, I'm not actually, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure. Oh, excuse me, what platform, Zoom or whatever. I don't know what they're going to be using, but you are going to be able to, the public is actually going to be able to hear them. So, this is kind of exciting to me, and they're going to do this for 2 weeks. But it's kind of exciting to me because maybe this will get people actually paying attention to the Supreme Court. Maybe this will actually get people saying, oh, wow, there is a third branch of our government, and it's headed by the Supreme Court. Maybe we should actually pay attention to it. So that's for the next 2 weeks. That's it. Okay, I guess, yeah. So I guess there are two other things. So former President Bush has come out, and he has really, I thought his remarks, he made a video. I did not watch the video, but I read his remarks. I thought that they were rather, might have been better than anything he's ever said while he was in office. But President Bush is calling for nonpartisan support and moving forward. Nonpartisan meaning chucking out our political parties and just saying, hey, we're Americans and we need to get through this. And he also called, he said, if you think of anybody, you need to think of these essential workers. You need to think of these medical professionals. And I'm not talking about nurses and doctors. There are a lot of people in the medical profession that I don't think get enough attention. There are patient care technicians. There are different levels of nurses, right? There are the people that clean the hospitals. There are the people that deliver the food in the hospitals. There are the people that, just do everything. These people are seeing, as in our state, death like they've never seen it. They are under, the worst conditions that they've ever worked in their lives. And he is saying that, if anything, oh, oh my goodness, guys, I'm sorry, excuse me. If anything, wear a mask because you don't want to get sick and have to have one of these people treat you. They're dealing with enough people. So, like I said, President Bush, in our classroom, I have a book of Bushisms, all the things that he said, during his presidency, which are, oh my goodness, some of them are doozies. One of my favorite is he said in a speech, he said, I think we can all agree that the past is behind us. Or no, that history, that's what he said. I think we can all agree that history is in the past. That's our president, right? He often referred to Africa as a country, not a continent. Anywho, thanks for some words right now, President Bush, to try to bring our country together. Last bit of news, and then we'll do our this day in history. So today, today in the Gazette, I don't know if you guys saw this. There is a pretty heated article about graduation, and it was focused, I think, on mostly Mohannes High School, our wonderful institution of learning, and Chalmont and Schenectady, and that parents were writing to Angelo Santa Barbara. We all know that Angelo Santa Barbara is your assemblyman in the New York State Senate, New York State Assembly. Your senator, sorry, I was thinking ahead, is George Amador. He is a Republican. Angelo Santa Barbara is a Democrat. He is your assemblyman. So a lot of people are going to Santa Barbara and saying, hey, Angelo, hey, man, you need to get on the horn with Cuomo, and we need to be able to have live and regular graduations. So here's what I would say to that. I'm glad people are fighting. I really am. I'm glad people are using the process. If there is a federal issue that you need to have dealt with, my friends, you need to contact your representative in the House, which is Paul Tonko. You need to contact because we share the same U.S. senators, Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, when you have a problem on a federal level. My representative is Antonio Delgado. My assemblyman is Chris Tague. My state senator is Jim Seward, who he himself just got out of the hospital. He was actually in the hospital with COVID. He is not running again. His seat is up. His term is up, and he has decided not to run. But these are the people that you reach out to and you say, hey, I have a problem. However, essentially, schools are closed until the fall, or they're essentially closed through June 30th. Summer school has been made distance learning. How are we going to have a graduation at Proctor's? And I don't know if you guys know this. Like, when we do our graduation at Proctor's, I think usually we're at 2. I think usually we're at 2. Well, guess what? There's a graduation before us, and there's a graduation after us, and there's a graduation on Friday. So, they're cranking graduations through Proctor's. That's a lot of people in Proctor's in a pretty short period of time. I don't know. I don't see it. I don't know. Maybe we can be creative. I saw someone, and I'd be willing to do this. I saw somebody posted today on the Facebook There's a Mahonison teacher page for staying in touch and stuff. And somebody had posted, what if the teachers lined the driveway of the school and the kids like drove through with their families or whatever, and we did some kind of announcement for each kid, and then they got their diploma, we could all say hi and everything, and give them a send-off. And I kind of thought, I was like, you know what, that might be a good idea. Life, guys, is about adapting, right? Yes, we get into our patterns, but we get into our schedule. But what we typically are preparing for is when that schedule or when that pattern is going to be thrown off, and how are we going to react. I want everybody to have a prom. I want everybody to have an in-person graduation, but I also think I want everybody to live, and I want everybody to be healthy. So is there a way that we can compromise, right? We've talked so much about that, this year in United States history, our country. If I wrote the book about the United States, I would name it Compromise, because that's what we've done so well over our history. So I don't know. An in-person graduation, at least the way we normally do it, I don't know. Maybe just the students? Maybe it's televised? Maybe it's just the students at Proctor's? I don't know. We'll see. All right, my friends. I don't know. It's a tough call. And I try to think, like, in 2 years, my son's graduating. In 4 years, my other son's graduating. What would I want for them? I see some schools around are doing these banners, like small banners for all their seniors. Great. I think that's really, really cool. You could do like a parade, right? Like the teacher parade we did through the district. Maybe something like that. Maybe here's another idea. Maybe what we could do is that teachers could deliver diplomas. I don't know. Maybe each teacher could have a couple diplomas to deliver to kids, so that there's a nice little personal touch and personal send-off. I'd do it. I'd be up for that. All right, my friends. So here we go. On this day, you want to talk about sacrifice? You want to talk about a tough time in our nation's history? We've been learning about the Great Depression. On this date in 1942, the federal government ordered food rationing. So we had a war to pay for. We had troops to feed. However, we were still in the Depression. And what would happen is you would get a little ration book. And it would say, like, you could get a 2 pounds of beef this week, and you could get, so much milk and whatever. And the rationing cards, you still had to pay for the items, but you had to come in and say, okay, I haven't used my ration card yet for beef, for eggs, or whatever, because we had to send so much food overseas, not only to our troops, but to our allies as well. So think about depression, war, things are just starting to get rolling. Now we can't buy the food we want to buy? Yeah. Think about that. Here's another thing that happened on this day in 1942. On this day in 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea. And why is this a big dealio? Well, it's a big dealio because it is a kind of a monumental, I guess. Yeah, I think that's the right way to say it. A monumental day in the history of warfare. So on this day in 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea, This is actually the first time that a big naval battle takes place, and the participants in the battles can't see one another. So we're now using planes as a part of naval warfare. But the other part of it is that weaponry has now gotten to this point on naval ships where you can fire past the horizon, which, if you don't know this, when you are out on the ocean and you're out on a whale watch or puffin watch or something cool like that, and as long as it's a calm day, you can see for 12 miles. So that means that on this day in naval history and military history, the Japanese and American ships were farther than 12 miles apart because they could not actually see each other as they were doing battle. On this day in 1946, we're going to be talking about World War II this week. The Tokyo trials, or the war crimes against the Japanese. Military leaders began. The Japanese were absolutely brutal when it came to the treatment of POWs, right? Not only American, but British POWs. You are supposed to give quarter. You are supposed to treat them honorably. And the Japanese did not so much do that. They were pretty horrible to our soldiers. On this day in 1954, Supreme Court case Texas v. Hernandez. Up until from 1870 to 1867 until 1954, we looked at the 14th Amendment as really an amendment that applied to African Americans. And in 1954, the Supreme Court solidifies that absolutely not. It does not apply just to African Americans. It applies to all people in all races. So specifically, Latinos are starting to get more rights extended to them. One of the last things that we'll talk about this year, the Vietnam War. On this day, the 173rd Airborne that was stationed in Okinawa becomes the first actual combat troops sent to Vietnam to fight the war. So military advisors had been in Vietnam for quite some time, and those advisors were fighting along the Vietnamese troops, the Southern Vietnamese troops. However, they were told that if you are fired upon, you can fire back. So really, we've been fighting this war in Vietnam, and our soldiers have been fighting the war for a while. On this day in 1979, Margaret Thatcher becomes the first female Prime Minister of England, and she is a part of the Conservative Party in England. And then on this day in 1991, and I don't know, I just thought this was funny. I don't know that we have a TV show. Maybe Game of Thrones is a TV show today that a lot of people are, and of course now it's off the air, but people were just crazy about it, right? Like everybody was watching it. Well, there was a TV show in, I guess it started in the late 70s where it ran all the way through the 80s, and on this day it ended in 1991, 13 seasons of Dallas. And it was about this family of, that had been real, made their money in the oil business and going back generations and generations. And I think his name is Larry Hagman, the actor, played, JR, right? He played JR, like the dad, the patriarch of the family. And I don't remember what season it was, but he gets shot and everybody, oh my God, they killed JR, right? It was like, people were just flipping out about it. But anyway, my friends, that's all I got for you tonight. Good reading. Things are still moving in a good direction for us. It's going to be a while. as when I sign off every night, I say to you, run the marathon. Don't run the sprint. Take your time. Get outside. You know, my son today, I was upstairs and I looked out the back window and I saw him sitting on the back porch reading. God, you know, a little tear came down my eyes. Get outside, read a book, go for a walk, get your mask on. Don't get trapped up in the house. And when you are in the house, it's time to open the windows. Even if it gets a little chilly in your bedroom or whatever, get some fresh air in there. It's time for some spring cleaning. Run the marathon. Don't run the sprint. And before you know it, we'll be back together again. So be good, my friends. Stay well. Stay healthy. Your work should be posted tomorrow for you. I've set most of it already up. I think I have one or two things to do. And then you guys will be all set with your work for the week. And I'll see you tomorrow night. Same bat time, same bat channel. Be good, my friends. Miss you guys.